Welcome back to Crime, Unearthed 911. In this third installment of the series, we'll be diving into the chilling stories of women who committed ruthless killers who showed no mercy. Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next intense and haunting case. Now, let's begin. Susan Diane Eubanks. On October 27th, 1997, in San Marcos, California, 33-year-old Susan Diane Eubanks committed an unforgivable act. She coldly shot each of her 4 children in the head. Brandon, 14 years old. Austin, 7 years old. Brigham, 6 years old. Matthew, 4 years old. None survived. After killing her children, Susan turned the gun on herself, but the bullet to her stomach did not end her life. She was arrested soon after. Those who knew Susan described her as a woman with a troubled past: alcoholism, toxic relationships, drowning in debt, and losing control of her emotions. On the night of the murders, she had a heated argument with her boyfriend and decided no one in her family should live anymore. On October 13th, 1999, Susan was sentenced to death for 4 counts of first-degree murder. However, due to a moratorium on the death penalty in California, her sentence was commuted to life without parole in 2024. Her children never had a chance to live, but she still does. Veronica Utilia Gonzalez. In 1995, in San Diego, California, 26-year-old Veronica Utilia Gonzalez and her husband committed one of the most horrifying crimes imaginable. The victim was 4-year-old Jenny Rose, Veronica's own niece. When Jenny's parents could no longer care for her due to legal issues and substance abuse, the little girl was sent to live with Veronica, hoping for a better life. Instead, Jenny endured horrific abuse. She was beaten, starved, hung by her arms from a closet hook, burned with a hairdryer. Her tiny body was covered in wounds, and the pain was so intense she could no longer even cry. On July 20th, 1998, Veronica was sentenced to death for first-degree murder with special circumstances of child torture. 27 years have passed, yet her sentence remains unfulfilled. Jenny never had the chance to live to 27. Socorro Susan Cairo. In November 1999, in California, 3 children were sound asleep believing they were safe in their own home. But the woman who gave birth to them, Socorro Susan Cairo, turned their home into a crime scene. Joey, 11 years old. Michael, 8 years old. Christopher, 5 years old. Susan shot and killed each of her children. The youngest, just 5 years old, had no chance to resist, no chance to escape. After murdering her children, Susan attempted suicide but failed. This woman was never diagnosed with a mental illness, yet her marriage was falling apart. Years of conflict with her husband drove her to the most vicious solution: murdering her children as an act of revenge. In 2002, Susan was sentenced to death for 3 counts of first-degree murder. 23 years have passed, yet she still awaits her final sentence. Brooke Marie Rhoades. On August 28, 2006, in Corona, California, 26-year-old Brooke Marie Rhoades, along with her accomplices, committed a brutal murder, all for the sake of robbery. 2 Latino men, aged 22 and 28, thought they were just going to have a fun night out. But in reality, they would never walk out of that hotel room alive. Brooke and her partners strangled the victims with their bare hands, choking them to death. All of this for a quick robbery. No remorse. No hesitation. On October 22nd, 2010, Brooke was sentenced to death for first-degree murder, with special circumstances of multiple murders during the commission of a robbery. 14 years have passed, yet the execution date has not been set. Kathy Lynn Saranana. On December 25th, 2005, what should have been a joyful Christmas day turned into a scene of deathly silence in the home of Kathy Lynn Saranana in Riverside, California. 2 young boys, Conrad Morales, 14 years old, and Ricky Morales, 11 years old, should have been loved and protected. Instead, they became the victims of a cruel aunt. They were starved, beaten until their small bodies were covered in bruises, tortured for months. That Christmas night, Ricky didn't survive. His body was hidden in a closet as if he was nothing more than discarded trash. A few months later, Conrad met the same fate. In 2009, Kathy was sentenced to death for the torture and murder of children. 15 years have passed. Yet her sentence still has not been carried out. Cynthia Lynn Kaufman. In 1986, America was shocked by a series of brutal murders spanning from California to Arizona. The victims? Young women kidnapped, tortured, murdered mercilessly. And the mastermind behind it all? None other than Cynthia Lynn Kaufman, along with her accomplice and lover, James Gregory Marlowe. They began their crime spree with a familiar method approaching women, pretending to be friendly, then luring them into traps. But when the victims let their guard down, Kaufman and Marlowe revealed their true predator nature. These women were beaten, tied up, humiliated, and finally brutally killed. One of the most horrifying cases happened in October 1986, when they kidnapped and murdered Sandra Neri, a 32-year-old woman in Costa Mesa, California. She was strangled to death before her body was discarded in a remote area. And soon after, a series of similar murders followed. Kaufman was arrested in November 1986 and quickly confessed. But during the trial, she showed no remorse. Instead, she blamed Marlowe, claiming she was forced to participate. However, the evidence was stacked against her. In 1990, Cynthia Lynn Kaufman was sentenced to death, becoming the first woman in California to receive such a sentence after the state reinstated the death penalty in 1977. Over 35 years have passed, yet her sentence has yet to be carried out. Carrie Lynn Dalton, San Diego, California, 1988. Carrie Lynn Dalton, along with her accomplices, planned and executed the gruesome murder of a woman named Irene Melanie May. And the reason? Dalton believed May had stolen her drugs. So she decided to take revenge in a way no one could have ever imagined. Irene May was kidnapped, held captive in a house, tortured for hours. Dalton and her partners beat her with hammers, knives, and iron rods. But that wasn't enough. They even poured battery acid on her during the savage assault. No one ever found May's body. But witnesses at the scene that day spoke up, providing enough evidence for police to charge Dalton. In 1995, Carrie Lynn Dalton was sentenced to death. Now 35 years later, her sentence still hasn't been carried out. Margaret Ann Allen. In 2005, in Titusville, Florida, 49-year-old Margaret Ann Allen committed one of the most brutal murders all over a mere suspicion. She believed her housekeeper had stolen money from her. In a fit of rage, Allen beat the woman, forced her to drink bleach, and when the victim began convulsing in pain, Allen strangled her with a cord until she died. With the help of two accomplices, she disposed of the body in a remote area, trying to cover up her crime. But it didn't take long for police to track her down. A key witness came forward, revealing crucial details of the murder. When arrested, Allen showed no fear, no remorse. Instead, she denied everything. In 2011, Margaret Ann Allen was sentenced to death. 14 years have passed, yet her sentence remains unfulfilled. Kimberly Diane Cargill, Texas, 2010. Kimberly Diane Cargill had a dark secret she wanted to bury forever. But one woman knew the truth, and she had to be silenced. Cherie Walker, a 39-year-old woman with intellectual disabilities, had been a babysitter for Cargill's children. But she was about to testify against Cargill in a custody battle. Cargill couldn't let that happen. On the night of June 18, 2010, she lured Cherie Walker to her home and murdered her by strangulation. Once she was certain the victim was dead, Cargill put her body in a car. She then poured gasoline over it and set it on fire, trying to destroy all evidence. But police quickly found Walker's remains. The evidence led straight back to Cargill. During the 2012 trial, she appeared calm, but she couldn't deny the overwhelming evidence against her. She was sentenced to death for first-degree murder. 14 years have passed, yet her execution date has not been set. Brittany Marlowe Holberg, Texas, 1996. An 80-year-old man, living alone, never imagined he would become the victim of a horrific crime. Brittany Marlowe Holberg, 23, a former drug addict and prostitute, met a B. Towery Sir through an acquaintance. She visited his home that fateful evening. What exactly happened between them remains unclear. But one thing is certain: Towery would never live to tell his story. Holberg stabbed him repeatedly with a knife, but she didn't stop there. She used a meat cleaver, scissors, other household tools, assaulting him over and over again. After the murder, Holberg calmly took a shower. She changed into clean clothes, then stole $1,400 from Towery's wallet and fled. She ran all the way to Tennessee, but police quickly tracked her down and arrested her. In 1998, Brittany Marlowe Holberg was sentenced to death for first-degree murder. 26 years have passed, yet her sentence remains unfulfilled. Tina LaSonia Brown. In 2010, in Pensacola, Florida, Tina LaSonia Brown, along with her daughter and neighbor, committed a crime so vicious it's almost unimaginable. They kidnapped, beat, and burned alive a 19-year-old girl, Audriana Zimmerman. But Audriana didn't die immediately. She was brutally beaten, tied up, placed in a car. Then they doused her with gasoline and set her on fire. Yet, somehow, Audriana survived long enough to attempt an escape. She fought to live, and before she died, she was able to identify her attackers. She never lived to see justice served, but her testimony helped police capture the killers. Before she succumbed to her injuries, Audriana named every one of them. In 2012, Tina LaSonia Brown was sentenced to death. Over 12 years have passed, yet the execution still hasn't taken place. Meanwhile, Audriana Zimmerman never got to see justice done. Robin Lee Rowe. In 1992, in Boise, Idaho, Robin Lee Rowe committed a brutal act, all to collect insurance money. After an argument with her husband, she set their house on fire, killing her husband and 2 young children in the blaze. But this wasn't the first time. Police quickly discovered that Robin had previously collected insurance payouts from a fire in 1980, a fire that killed her son under suspicious circumstances. As suspicions about the 1992 fire grew, investigators found damning evidence, leading to Robin's arrest. In 1993, she was sentenced to death for 3 counts of first-degree murder. Over 32 years have passed, yet Robin Lee Rowe still hasn't faced her sentence. Her actions were not only cruel, they were devastating to the surviving family members, the very people she killed for money. We've just explored some truly chilling stories of women who committed horrific crimes against their own loved ones. Their rash decisions not only took the lives of their victims, but also sentenced themselves to irreversible fates. The lesson here is clear. Whether male or female, we must always be aware of the power of our emotions and the consequences of our actions. Impulsive decisions only lead to regret and pain. If you want to continue following these haunting and dramatic stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn a notification bell. Thank you for watching.